Will there be history books? Will there be books? I don't know. Those historians have been liberally biased. I mean, you look at their ratings of the presidents, they're ridiculously skewed towards modern Democrats. So I don't know. Will historians still be liberal in 50 years? I don't know.
Gavin Newsom is the front runner. You keep hinting he will be reluctant to finally run.
It's not a hint. I did an interview with him again on Next Up. If that's what your daughter is saying to you about being the governor of California, imagine what her life will be like if he's elected president.
The weekend before the Republican National Convention, I was the only one who thought it would be J.D. Vance.
I had senior Trump advisors saying, please don't let him pick J.D. Vance. And they were saying it with an openness I've never heard in my career about anybody. I was surprised at how Governor Walz's performance was not lambasted as just ridiculous.
Is the continued divide between Trump and the Federal Reserve putting us behind the curve again? A lot of experts are concerned about the whole Jerome Powell too late thing. Maybe the Fed can take the right action at the right time. Maybe not. We could be looking at a potential economic slowdown. And what does that mean for your savings? Why don't you consider diversifying with gold through Birch Gold Group? For decades, gold has been viewed by many as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation or global uncertainty and high inflation. Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you have an IRA or an old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or you can just buy some gold and keep it for safekeeping. First, though, get educated about gold. Birch Gold's going to send you a free info kit. Just text my name, Larry, to the number 989898. Again, text Larry to 989898. Consider diversifying a portion of your savings into gold, and that way, if the Fed can't stay ahead of the curve for the country, at least you can take action for yourself. That's Larry, 989898. Do that today. Thank you. And now let's bring in Mark Halperin. He's got a brand new podcast with Megyn Kelly's network. It's called Next Up, and it's incredibly popular, and I'm really happy for him, and I'm not jealous at all. And he's also got his own empire that he's growing. It's called the Two-Way Platform, where he's got, I think, 70, 80 shows now on that platform, Mark? It's growing by leaps and bounds, as they say.
86 shows, to be precise.
That's what I thought. Well, the anchor tenant is the morning meeting. It's you, it's Sean Spicer, it's Dan Turrentine, and this thing really has become must-view streaming and must-listen podcasting on a daily basis. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so popular, where you just sort of address the stories every day, but the conversation is very different, unlike any other on different media platforms?
Well, that is our tagline, conversations like no other. Largely the popularity of Sean Spicer and our guest host, Larry O'Connor, I would say. But building on that foundation, all our programs on Two-Way, we try to do several things. One is the two-wayness of it all, which is to say we have an audience of folks who come on the platform and are able to raise their hands and ask questions. And I think people really like the opportunity to participate and see a consistent cast of characters from around the country, nay, the world, who are part of our regular community, number one. Number two, we try to have long, sophisticated, but accessible conversations that are conversational. The morning meeting is based on something I used to go to every day, which is the network television news divisions have morning meetings where the bureaus from all over the world dial in. You run through, an assignment editor runs through what's happening that day, and then you kind of kick things around. And I think to be able to start the day at 9 Eastern time with a nice curated list of what's coming up, and to be forward-looking, not talking about what happened yesterday so much as what's going to happen later today. I think that those are elements that I'm not saying there's no show like it, but there's not many, and very few shows have the two-way participation by video.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that what happens is, for those who are newcomers to the concept, you've got your audiences that watch passively, either on the YouTube platform or X or whatever other platform. But people can also join via Zoom, where they activate their camera, and then if they're lucky, they get chosen to participate. And it's funny, as a talk radio host, as someone who is a lover of talk radio since the dawn of it, really, with Rush Limbaugh, at least in terms of its real resurgent popularity, I would always talk to my audience every day on talk radio and say, you got to call in, and you've got to, if you think I'm wrong, tell me. And that's what makes this special. It's what makes it different. Try doing that with Anderson Cooper. Try calling him up and telling him he's wrong while you're watching. And that really does add an element, I think, Mark.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to that, and then another element that's also distinctive for us. Talk radio is obviously an inspiration for two-way, and you might listen to like Boston Talk Radio, sports radio, and Kenny from Needham who calls in every week, and okay, I remember Kenny, and Kenny's obsessed with John Havlicek, whatever it is. The value of two-way is it's video, and so you can see the other community members, and even if they're not called on or they're not even trying to be called on, people on their community know each other, and they're running a parallel chat within the Zoom and on YouTube, talking about each other. Hey, I remember you. I remember you said this yesterday. I like what you're wearing. They're engaging with the community as much as they're engaging with me, Sean, and Dan. And then the other thing is, it's all voices under one roof. Dan is a Democrat. Sean's a Republican. But we urge people to come on and express their point of view. Safe space has become kind of a PC word, but we're trying to reclaim it. People can come on and say whatever they want. And I say to people, if you're a conservative, you're MAGA, listen to the liberals because you can learn from them. Don't complain that they're being given a platform and vice versa. And I think there's just not a lot of programs like that, and certainly not with the two-way participation.
I agree. And it's growing and it's popular. And hopefully people are paying attention to that, because I've always said I don't mind social media. Everyone's like, oh, social media is terrible and the internet is terrible. And I actually love it. I think it's great. It brings citizens the ability to participate directly with people who move their world.
Yeah.
However, when you're anonymous, when you're under a fake name and a fake picture, I think you feel emboldened to say some of the worst possible things you would say to somebody that you would never say if your name and your face and your family knew that you were saying it.
Yep.
And that's a difference here too. It's not just, Jimmy from Edgewater might not be Jimmy from Edgewater. You could be using a fake name and disguising your voice. But when your video face is right there on two-way with your name, I think it automatically tempers how you deal with somebody you disagree with.
It does. I mean, in the history of the platform, and we've done programming now for over a year and adding programs regularly, I think we've probably had 4 instances where somebody said something that, was out of bounds, where we had to cut them off because of the reason you say. It's not X. It's not a social media platform where people can, under the cloak of anonymity or without being held with the accountability that comes with being on live audio and video, they just say stuff they shouldn't. And we just don't have it on the platform. There's spirited debate. There's disagreement. There's raised voices on occasion. But we have the tagline "Conversations like no other," and then 2 other things we say: do everything with peace, love, and understanding, and no smack in the chat. But the chat does have smack in it. People do stuff in the chat they wouldn't say on the air, and I don't love that. But the main event is the live video program, which you can watch on demand. But the live video program, where again, as you rightly point out, there's just a level of accountability that I think is great. And that doesn't mean there aren't spirited MAGA and spirited Bernie people and all sorts of divergent and diverse voices, but they're engaging with each other in a civil manner as opposed to calling each other names.
By the way, we encourage smack in our chat.
Oh, I know. It's your stock and trade.
We need more of it, in fact. And feel free, everybody, to participate right now and go ahead and throw as much
smack it up.
Well, usually I'm the one, I get the smack, which I'm fine with. I have a thick skin. Do you think that, obviously you are bought into this, you're invested in it literally and figuratively, and you think that this is a growth industry? Is it partly because of the interaction and what we've just discussed, but also, you tell me, but I think because there's no gatekeepers in a big corporate office at 30 Rock or at BlackRock or down in Atlanta who's deciding who's worthy to have a show, who's worthy to be a host. It's sort of the Serengeti plain with streaming content right now, and it's survival of the fittest. And oftentimes the most effective communicators are going to succeed.
Yeah, the barriers to entry in this world are a lot lower, right? We have a studio, but I don't do my shows from the studio typically. I do it from wherever I am on my laptop, and we're trying to produce shows that are good enough. The quality is good enough. Nobody's going to be distracted by the quality, and we're adding bells and whistles here and there, but we're doing it at a very low cost. And part of the challenge, live video is the 3rd most popular form of video on YouTube after comedy and music. And it's hard to produce live video. It requires some expertise. And my colleagues are great live television producers, what we used to call television, now streaming video. And so that people find that appealing, particularly in the news context, to be able to say, yeah, this is live, this is happening currently. That means I'm getting the latest information and I'm participating in a conversation that's live. Election nights, we've had great success. Because if you're watching a night of the New Hampshire primary or a debate, say, you want to participate. You want to be able to hear a long, sophisticated conversation that's casual and engaging and allows you to be part of the conversation. And again, it's just not on offer other places, so it's distinctive.
I love that you keep saying long, sophisticated conversations, because they're long by most standards. And by the way, your podcast next up, that's generally speaking, what, a 60-minute long form interview with one individual, right? And it's such a great lesson to learn from the 2024. There's a lot of lessons from the 2024 campaign, and everybody talks about the growth of podcasts. The Kamala Harris 60 Minutes interview, you and I have a disagreement about some of the decisions that were made in editing it down. Set that aside for a minute. The fact that they spoke with a candidate for president for 40 minutes and decided to just present 20 minutes of that interview. And I'm sure you've heard it in a newsroom before. I've heard it before, broadcast networks, that the American public have a low attention span. They have a short attention span. You got to, sort of tighten it up, and you've got to make the interviews work. Meanwhile, Donald Trump goes on Joe Rogan, talks for 3 hours, and that got bigger numbers than the edited Kamala Harris interview.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So in other words, to me, I find it to be rather insulting to suggest that they've got to do all of these edits for the American viewer because they have such a short attention span. Because when you do what you do in a long form interview, when Rogan does what he does, it works. We actually don't have a short attention span. We want good content. We just want it done well.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes maybe it's a little much. I was talking to some very prominent podcasters not that long ago, and they basically said, one of them said, I agreed to do a 90-minute interview with somebody again, because I normally do 3 hours, but they didn't want to. And said, I really regretted only doing 90 minutes. You just can't get it done in 90 minutes.
I love that.
And I remember the day back when I was working as an editorial producer with Peter Jennings. We get 20 minutes with a presidential candidate, and we think, wow, 20 minutes. That's, a robust amount of time. And then, as you said, we typically would chop it up and not show the full 20. I think that it requires you to be a skilled interviewer, because if you're going to edit it, you can, be flabby. You can go down some dark holes and dead ends. If you're putting it all out live, you got to make it good. And people like Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly, who do these shows that are hours long, they're making it work. People will make time because they like the quality of it, and you can let the thing breathe. There's so many ways you can have conversations that are revealing and journalistically sound in a long form that you just can't in a shorter interview. And
I think that the public reacts well to it as well. I think that, and then in the long run, I think it helps a more informed voter in the long run, which is part of the responsibility of the media in this sort of compact that we have, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I believe that our primary responsibilities are twofold. One is to hold all powerful interests accountable to the public interest, and the other is to tell the stories of our time, to reveal the character and the thought process and the nature of people, particularly people who are running for president, which is what I've spent most of my career covering. And the ability to do those two things in 3 hours or 2 hours or 90 minutes is exponentially greater than to try to do it in 20 minutes, because a skilled presidential candidate, or even a semi-skilled one, can run the clock, run the four corners, and kill out a 20-minute interview without ever saying anything. And of course, that's a big part of why Kamala Harris was unwilling in the end to go on Joe Rogan, because she knew a 3-hour test was a lot harder to do than a 15-minute test.
I don't think current NBA or NCAA basketball fans will have any idea what you meant.
The four corners.
But
back before there was a shot clock.
Yes.
North Carolina's Dean Smith, when he was facing an opponent who he couldn't go the full game against. I think games were 40 minutes then. I don't know. Are they 40 minutes now? College basketball games?
48.
They're 40. But I think they were.
No, they're 40 now. 2 20-minute halves.
Yeah. Four corners. Phil Ford, who was his point guard, would keep the ball, and he would just dribble around while the other 4 players stood as far apart as possible on the 4 corners of the half court. And there was no shot clock. So you could eat up, 7 minutes of possession in
Great
order to
two-handed
shorten the
passes
game. Yeah.
across to each
Yeah.
other. It was
Yeah.
they killed the clock. It was
Yeah.
the prevent defense, and
Yeah.
it worked.
And it worked. Because he couldn't win a 40-minute game, but he could win a 7-minute game.
I'd love to talk. I want to pick your brain a little bit about your history and about what you've seen, because you really have. I know it's a cliche, but you've sort of had a front row seat at the presidential politics at the highest level for a couple of decades now. And I think because of that, because not only your political observations, but also your knowledge of how the media works, I think is quite invaluable considering where we are now. But one last question about this new dawn, this new age that you're taking advantage of and actually really succeeding with. The old axiom, the medium is the message, which was coined during the television era. I think it resonates even more now with regard to the candidates we're going to be seeing going forward. I mean, Trump stands alone, but do you see a sort of new crop of potential elected officials and candidates who are harnessing this new medium? And because of that, it's affecting the message, not just how it's delivered, but what they're saying.
Well, for sure that it's a skill set that wasn't germane because it didn't exist in the 90s and the aughts, where you've got to have game on social media to raise money, to communicate, to entertain, to get pickup in the traditional media. So having the ability to use social media is big. And then this Taylor Swift interview last week that's got so much attention, where she went on, the podcast of her boyfriend and her future brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Really
whoa. Why are you sure they're getting married?
I'm not. I still think the whole thing might be a publicity stunt.
Maybe you had some
just
deep sources.
Shorthand way of referring to him. Has got a lot of people saying, well, if you're a presidential candidate and you can find the equivalent of your fiance to do a podcast interview with, why not do that as opposed to doing an interview with even a friendly podcaster who's still going to ask you hard questions? For a lot of voters, create the illusion of a tough interview or an on-point interview where the topics that they want to hear about are being covered, but maybe in a friendlier manner, but not a obsequious manner that would for a normal person who doesn't pay much attention to how the press works say, well, yeah, they did an interview. They talked about immigration, and they talked about Europe, whatever. So I think the ability to do social media and then to play well on particularly video platforms is something that is a new skill, and you don't have to even think about the traditional media if you don't want to.
Who do you think's the best video-based interviewer right now? Or at best is a tough word to use, but
besides the two of us,
of course, obviously, present company included. I mean, if an elected official or a politician is going to be sitting with X, that makes you lean forward. You make sure you're going to check that out.
Megyn Kelly and Joe Rogan are the two I think are my top two.
Why? What makes
they ask interesting questions. They're not afraid to ask anything. They have a good fingertip feel for where the news is, but also not just news, but what's revealing of thought process, what's revealing of character. They have senses of humor. They disarm the person they're interviewing, and they do long interviews. So they're going to get to it. I listen to a lot of other people, even people with 3-hour shows, and I say, well, they didn't get to the three things I thought were most important. Megyn Kelly and Joe Rogan pretty consistently, very consistently ask the things that I'm interested in hearing about.
Yeah. And then in the traditional form on cable news, where they don't have as much freedom to dive deep, if it's more of a short form, I know you've worked with a lot of these people.
Yeah.
I'll jump in. I actually think Brett Baer is at the top of his game.
Brett Baer's excellent.
And Brett Baer has 15 minutes with a politician. He's going to make the most.
Brett's excellent. My friend Joe Scarborough is excellent too, because he has a little bit more time, and he's got also the same nose for news. The thing about Brett, and it's true of Joe too, when Dick Cheney was vice president, Mary Madeline was his I think she was his communications director, not chief of staff, but she was in charge of helping him with media decisions. He would only do Tim Russert on Sunday mornings. And his reason that we tell Mary is, Tim's the only one who's going to ask me the right questions. I don't want to get up on Sunday and ruin my Sunday morning to go to these other places where they're going to ask me biased, stupid, uninteresting questions that aren't going to yield the news I want to make. So if I go on Tim, it will be a tough interview. It'll be a fair interview. It'll be on point with what we should be talking about. And I think that's part of why Brett gets a lot of exclusives because, well, in part because he knows that people know the president's going to watch it, but in part because they know Brett's going to ask the right questions. So they're not going to be accused of doing an interview that's softball, and they're not going to be doing an interview that doesn't cover the topics that they want to be covering.
Yeah. It also doesn't hurt that he's got a pretty damn big audience these days.
Got a big audience, and Joe Scarborough is the same way. Maybe Brett's more for the right and Joe for the left, but they reach the people. You know, Trump watches both of them, and they reach the people who a lot of newsmakers want to reach.
Yeah, I've mentioned, we talk about Morning Joe quite a bit here, and I mean, it might not be the largest audience, but it is a very specific, targeted, and influential audience for that show.
If you go to the House gym or the Senate gym, it's all anybody's watching. And when I used to be on Morning Joe regularly, after I appeared on Morning Joe regularly for several years, I never met a member of Congress I didn't know, because even if I'd never met them, they felt like they knew me and they wanted to talk to me because I was on the show they watched for 3 hours every morning.
Of course, I still liked the Imus show better, but that's just me talking. So we're talking about the past. We're talking about sort of, I would love to ask you how we got here, but let's start with you. You're born in New York, but then you grew up in Bethesda.
Born in Boston, grew up in Bethesda.
I apologize. I thought you were born in New York.
Yeah.
But I knew you grew up in Bethesda, which is the Tony suburb just on the border of Washington, D.C.
Tony-ish.
Pretty Tony. Maybe not your neighborhood, but
yeah, I lived on the wrong side of the Bethesda tracks. Maybe. No, it's a very nice, nice place. It's a very nice place. It's very affluent and nice.
And you weren't a dumb kid. You went to an Ivy League school. You can disclose which one if you'd like.
I went to Harvard. I went to public school in Bethesda, Maryland, and then I went to Harvard for undergraduate.
And so, did you always want to be a reporter or get into the media?
I didn't. I grew up.
You could have chosen many professions.
I wanted to be an expert in Japanese U.S. relations as either a lawyer or a diplomat for a variety of reasons. My dad worked in the government on U.S.-Japanese relations, and my public high school offered Japanese. And at the time I was in high school, Japan. There's a famous book called Japan is Number One. Japan was kind of the way China is now. It was seen as an extraordinary threat economically and for influence with the United States. So that was what I wanted to do. But my hometown paper was the Washington Post. A lot of my dad's friends were in government and journalism. And after I graduated, I just got a job, not knowing what I wanted to do, answering phones at ABC News in New York, and really just took to not just the excitement of it, but the importance of it, the capacity to really play a role that the founders saw as super important for a democracy, which is, as I said before, telling the stories of our time and holding powerful interests accountable to public interest. And from the first days of my career, I had the good fortune to work around and then with Peter Jennings, who is in my decades-long career really one of the very few legends I had the honor of working with. And he just taught me a ton about not just how fun the job was, how influential, how exciting, but also the sacred trust with the country and the importance of doing the job, again, particularly if you're covering politics and government, in a way that allows voters to be better informed.
And one of your colleagues in that newsroom was another reporter in D.C. that people might recognize, Britt Hume, right?
Yeah. So Britt was the White House correspondent. And I didn't really work with Britt, except very indirectly, until 1994, after I'd worked in New York for ABC, then I worked in D.C., then covered the Clinton campaign, then the Clinton White House. And then I moved to New York to work in what's called special events. But that one period when I covered the Clinton White House, Britt, who had covered the Bush administration, stayed on. Whenever there's a new administration, some of the reporters stay, some don't. Britt had covered the Republican Bush, but then stayed to cover Clinton. And he didn't really know Clinton and didn't really know the Clinton people. And I did, because I'd covered the campaign. So ABC, people might imagine that if you cover the White House, you have glamorous digs. We had 4 people sitting in a tiny little booth. It was like working on a submarine. And I sat between Britt and Ann Compton, longtime ABC News correspondent. And it was like a PhD in how to cover a White House. Britt was so experienced and just so understanding of both the production side of television and then the editorial side of how to cover a White House. And I'm so indebted to him. I had him on my Next Up show recently, and
yeah, it was a great episode.
Almost cried, because it's just so indebted to him for all that he taught me in a relatively short period of time. I covered the White House sitting alongside him from January of '93 for about a little over a year. But in that time, I just learned so much from him and Peter, and then one other person at ABC, a guy named Roger Goodman, who's, I think, the best director in the history of television news. Those 3 guys taught me just a ton about how to do what I've been doing.
Well, in that ABC News Washington bureau, let's add David Brinkley to the mix. That was, I think, I know everyone loved Tim Russert at Meet the Press. David Brinkley's This Week was my favorite show. That was go-to viewing for me when I was starting to come of age and understand politics.
Yeah.
So that culture, that ABC News culture that you sort of cut your teeth on and learned the business with those personalities, how is that culture different than, let's just say, the ABC newsroom culture in DC today? Because it is different, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Although, I haven't worked there in a long time, so I don't have as intimate an understanding of the culture. There were other people who worked at ABC when I worked there, including Sam Donaldson, Cokie Roberts, Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, Ted Koppel, who was based in the Washington bureau, Charlie Gibson. Jeez. These are some of the legends of television. And Roone Arledge, who is probably, in my view, some people would say Roger Ailes, I think, but in my view, Roone Arledge is the father of modern television news, and who come from ABC Sports. Roone's view was he was going to hire the very best anchors in the world and have them compete with each other. So our anchors, when I was at that part of my career, Ted and Peter competed with each other way more than they would compete with someone at CBS or NBC. And Diane and Barbara the same way. They would much rather have another network get a scoop or an exclusive interview than one of the other ABC people, because that's really where Roone had them focus their competition. So there's nothing like that now. I mean, I don't mean to diss the current ABC anchors, but I think by almost any metric you could use, they were not these titans of media. And in part, that's just because of new media, where there's now many places where someone can be a prominent anchor. Back then, it was, Fox really wasn't a thing. So it was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and then CNN eventually. But they were, when I would go out on the road with any of the anchors I named, covering presidential candidates, they were bigger stars than the candidates. When Peter Jennings would go cover a Mike Dukakis event or even a Bill Clinton event, people would gravitate to Peter because he was, one of these anchors who had tens of millions of viewers every night. So that's one difference. And then, back then, news was, and this is not just true of ABC, but it's true of all the other networks. News divisions were owned by companies who saw it as a sacred trust and as a loss leader. The news division didn't need to make money. It helped them with their government affairs department in a variety of ways. But it was meant to say, we care about the public interest and, don't cancel our FCC license because we're doing serious things. And they had these affiliate stations all over the country. So a very different business model. Now, I mean, there's some serious work going on, but they're much more likely to cover what happened last night on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills than they are to cover what happened in the Middle East.
What about objectivity? How often back then was it sort of drummed in or repeated, or did you have to sort of keep reminding each other that you have a part of that public trust is to stay as objective as possible? We're not robots. We're not machines. We have our biases. We do have our opinions. But it seems like back then there was at least a greater effort to be more objective and at least make a greater attempt to tell more of the story than we see today.
I think that's true from the Trump era on, because I think Trump has caused the bias against Republicans to supercharge. But there was liberal media bias back then that was pretty pronounced. Um, it was not. It was not as talked about because there wasn't as much online and other media criticism. In other words, there were very few places. There was one newsletter back then from the Media Research Council. I think that's what it was called, or it is called.
Media Research Center, Brent Bozell.
Brent Bozell. Yeah. So they did a newsletter, and I would read it, and I was fascinated. And they would write up, how the coverage had been slanted against Republicans, but that was really it, and that didn't get broad circulation. And so I think, I saw it every day, and one of the things I learned from Peter Jennings, who did not believe in liberal bias coverage, and he very outspokenly supportive of efforts to make sure Republicans were covered fairly, but Peter was the exception. So I think that,
and I think Brinkley made an effort on his show.
He did as well. And I think Brinkley was actually relatively conservative, and he was more friendly with, unlike most news people, he was more friendly, I think, with Republicans than he was with Democrats. So it certainly, to go back to your question in a more pointed way, people in the business would walk around with their chests held high and their chins jutted out, saying we're objective and we're fair and we're guardians of the truth. But in political coverage, at least, the level of liberal bias was staggering, and it was so ingrained that they didn't see it. So 1992, when Pat Buchanan ran, and he ran basically on the agenda that Donald Trump would win on in 2016, Pat was mocked by my colleagues. They talked about him in either mocking or derisive terms, not at all interested in why it was that a guy who had been a presidential advisor and a columnist was giving the incumbent president of the United States a run for his money in a Republican primary. So I saw it from that race forward. The liberal bias was quite something. But again, nothing on the scale of what it's like now, because the hostility to President Trump.
Yeah. And I thank you for bringing up the Pat Buchanan thing, because it's very similar to how they treated Trump and still treat Trump, I think. And do they recognize when they have that sneer, when they report on a candidate the way they do, that those American viewers and voters who support that candidate, they take it, but they think they're attacking them, us. And it sort of helps create that divide.
Right. So it is what, along with his extraordinary talent, gave rise to Rush Limbaugh, and then eventually to Fox News and shows like yours and Red social media. But back then there were very few, because there was not digital technology, and because the barriers to entry to have a national platform were so high. There was no outlet to demonstrate to people in the liberally biased media that, hey, there's other people out there who have alternatives. You didn't really have alternatives.
Right.
You read Time and Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report, and you read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and you watched ABC, NBC, and CBS. And if you were conservative, you knew they were biased against you, but you really didn't have much to replace them with. Then we saw talk radio, then we saw Fox News, and we saw digital, social media, etc. But back then, the market share for these biased places was so high.
Right.
I'm not saying that they were blameless, but you can understand why they didn't feel the pressure to say, hey, half the country is unhappy with our product, because many people in that half the country were still patronizing the product because they had no other product to go to.
I've always wondered this, because how many more decades does Fox News have to dominate before somebody says, hey guys, maybe we should actually change the way we cover it. Maybe one of our primetime shows on CNN should be, Tucker Carlson or some other conservative voice.
I did an interview on Next Up the other day with the guy who up until a few weeks ago was the fact checker for the Washington Post.
Oh yes, the Pinocchio guy, Glenn
Kessler. And he said, and the reason I booked him on the show is he wrote in his new Substack that the reason the Washington Post can't appeal to people on the right is because they're addicted to the revenue they get from their current audience that's liberal. And if they tried to be fair, or God forbid, have some more conservative voices, their current audience would disappear. It's kind of a remarkable statement to make, but he said the audience is liberally biased for the Washington Post, not because the coverage is liberally biased, which he denied up and down, but because the DC area is filled with liberals, and so that created the natural audience for the paper, and that the editorial page is very liberal, and that readers don't know the difference between the editorial page and the news side. I think that I didn't agree with them, and we were at a pretty friendly but contentious conversation about it. But I think that you look at places like CNN and the Washington Post, whose owners and managers recognize that, the famous Michael Jordan adage, the reason he didn't endorse Democrats, even though he was a Democrat, is because Republicans buy sneakers too. They know there's this whole other audience in there. And they also know, by the way, it's an abrogation of professional duty to not cover things fairly. But making the change is hard. Just like it's hard to change if you're a newspaper to say, well, we should be making more of our money from video. Very hard to change because you don't want to diminish what you're doing with the text traditional product. It's the same thing. Well, we're in business because of our current customers. We don't want to alienate our current customers. So it's a challenge, but
Jimmy Fallon has Greg Gutfeld on, and he's got the best ratings he's had in a year.
Yeah,
so maybe that's a little bit of a.
I agree with you. It's really not that hard to execute, and part of why they don't want to execute it is Trump derangement syndrome. They don't want to tell their friends and family that their coverage now is going to maybe say, well, that thing Donald Trump did that before we would have said was the end of democracy. Well, that was actually pretty good. Right. They culturally, they don't want to get into that. And it's a hard thing to do.
That brings, I want to pick your brain a little bit on politics. I said it on my program last week that I think there's going to be a Democrat that emerges, might not even be someone who holds elected office, could be a Democrat who's never run for office before. But I think there's a lane for a Democrat to step up and say, you may not like Donald Trump the way he goes about his business. You may not like his personal life. You may not like his crass and abrasive manner, but he's been right about a couple of things. There's a couple of things that he's doing well. And we Democrats, I want to be a candidate who can recognize what works, fix those things. I'm not going to mess up the border. I'm going to keep his policies there. But now we're going to do some other things that are going to appeal to our Democrat base. I think that candidate will immediately shoot to the top.
Yeah. My friend Joe Scarborough, who I interviewed last week on Next Up, he agrees with you almost precisely.
Oh, God. Now I'm going to lose my audience.
Exactly.
You've blown my credibility.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, the problem is if you say something nice about Donald Trump within the activist base of the Democratic Party, you'll just be hammered. So, you have to be skillful. So Bill Clinton.
That used to be the same with Reagan, though, right? With the Democrats. If you can't praise Reagan, Reagan's mantra, Reagan's the devil.
But Clinton did. Clinton went and visited him when he was running for president and took some jelly beans. So there's a hard thing to contextualize for younger folks. But Bill Clinton in 1992, when he ran for president, supported the following positions, all of which were antithetical to broad part of the Democratic Party, certainly the base, and I think in almost every case were absent from the Democratic, contrary to the Democratic Party platform from 1988. He supported the death penalty. He supported right to work laws. He supported free trade. He supported welfare reform. These were very out there positions for a Democrat. But he also would say things like, I'm a Democrat by what would he say, birth, inclination, and heritage. And he would say he'd have the support of Maxine Waters and other very liberal Democrats. So I think for a Democrat to do what you're suggesting, to say, well, I think what President Trump did, close the borders, great. Hey, getting NATO countries to pay more of their fair share, great. These are things that are not just popular with the MAGA base, but are popular broadly. I think you'd have to have the skill and the personal relationships to not have your nomination die in the on the vine because the activist wing of the party says, you said one nice thing about Donald Trump, I can't support you.
Yeah. All right. So if you had to put your money on it right now, who's the Democrat nominee for president in 28?
I've always had an answer to that question at this point in the cycle. I'll make one up for you, but I don't have one. I don't have a strong feeling. I think it's a very weak field. I think some of the candidates who are talked about as sure things to run aren't going to run in the end. So if you ask me, I'll say Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, but I think he's been one of the biggest underperformers of the last year. So I've downgraded his stock, but I'd still, if I got to give you an answer, that's what I'd give you.
All right, I got to ask you then because I watched the show. And I think it's a no-brainer that Gavin Newsom is the front runner.
Mhm.
And you keep hinting that you have some sort of inkling that he will be reluctant to finally run.
It's not a hint. I did an interview with him again on Next Up, plugging my show organically. And he was my second guest on the show, second episode. And he told the story that because I said to him, I think it's a myth that you've decided to run. And he said, you're right. He said his daughter came home from, I can't remember if she said school or visiting a friend or doing something, in tears because she's got to travel with like one or two security. And she said, when are you going to not be governor of California anymore so I can have a more normal life? Okay. So if that's what your daughter is saying to you about being the governor of California, imagine what her life will be like if he's elected president. I know he's a very caring dad. So
I think he's also a political animal.
He is.
Mayor of San Francisco,
He is.
Lieutenant Governor of California,
Of course
Governor
he is. Of course he is. But he didn't have kids of a certain age when he was doing that. And I don't believe his wife is super enthusiastic about it either. Now, again, Michelle Obama wasn't enthusiastic, and Barack Obama found a way to do it. But I just don't believe in the end he's going to put his family through this. I just don't believe that.
Meanwhile, you seem pretty all in on J.D. Vance as something catastrophic would have to happen with J.D. Vance for him not to be the nominee.
I think so. I think he'll win the president's endorsement. I think he's been more empowered than any incumbent vice president with presidential ambitions we've ever seen, and in the modern era. And I think he's proven to be extremely skillful at all sorts of things, including getting people to like him. The party had a lot of doubts about him before Donald Trump picked him, and now I'd say impossible, at least in my experience, to find influential people in the party who aren't super excited by him. So I think his route to the nomination could be extremely easy. And I think he'll raise $2 or $3 billion if he runs. And that's going to be all spent on the general election, if I'm right, and not beating up other Republicans, while the Democrats will have a very contested nomination.
I went to a dinner the weekend before the Republican National Convention, and the big parlor game in D.C. was who's going to be the running mate. It was at Capitol Grill, so you'll appreciate the Tony nature of the meal. It was fantastic. And all Republican consultants, a lot of TV personalities that you see on various networks, all putting and most of them were D.C. based, Virginia based. And I was the only one who thought it would be J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
I was the only one who thought it would be a good idea for it to be J.D. Vance, by the way.
Yeah.
They all thought it would be Youngkin, or they thought a couple of them thought Nikki Haley, which I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
But they were sure that J.D. Vance was going to be poisoned, that he was going to repel women, that he was going to be all the wrong things. And partly it's a commentary on how when you're in D.C., you really don't have an idea of kind of what the rest of the country is thinking.
Yeah. Although in Wisconsin, where I was for the convention, up until the day the announcement was made, I had senior Trump advisors saying, please don't let him pick J.D. Vance. And they were saying it with an openness that I've never heard in my career about anybody. I've never heard senior people close to the candidate making the selection be so openly disdainful and worried about a selection. And yet now those very same people just tell me on a regular basis they were wrong.
They were. Mark, I think that, but everyone talks about different things in the 2024 campaign, the tipping point, that vice presidential debate could be the most influential vice presidential debate in our history. I thought it was amazing. And as a Republican, a lifelong Republican, it was the first time that I felt so incredibly proud of a candidate who could articulate and voice and communicate our policies the way he did.
Yeah. Although I got a grade on a curve.
Compared to other Republican vice presidents, compared to his opponent?
Compared to his opponent. I mean, I was surprised, even with liberal media bias, I was surprised at how Governor Walz's performance was not lambasted as just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I thought it was really, really weak.
Yeah, it was. Speaking of weak that year, and we'll wrap it up here, but is Kamala Harris done? At least for the next couple of cycles.
I'm a big believer in second acts, and history suggests you can do it. I continue to believe that the things that bedeviled her in 20 when she ran on her own as vice president, and then when she had 107 days to run by her own choice, uh, they're not going away. And I think they're very. It's a set of attributes. Primarily, the one I say is she does not like to make difficult decisions under pressure, which is the job description for presidential candidate and president. I'd be surprised if she could build the financial and political support to mount a presidential campaign, but I don't rule it out, particularly because right now the party is so weak.
Last question. People forget that during 2016, you were under fire for being a little less critical of Donald Trump as your colleagues. You would sort of. I remember this. I remember the whole controversy over the Mexican judge controversy and a couple of other things where you say, well, it's not exactly the way you're painting it. And I think you took heat for that. Since 2016, or in the last 9 years, and where we are today, where you are today as a journalist who loves politics and loves this country, do you think when the history books are written, Donald Trump will be treated 50 years from now the way he's being treated now? Do you think it'll be worse, or do you think maybe there will be a fresh set of eyes?
Will there be history books? Will there be books? I don't know. I think largely that will be answered by how he does in the balance of this term. His first term is hard to evaluate, even if you want to take aside some of the things that occurred that were big and are cast in a negative light because of COVID. He didn't handle COVID perfectly on the one hand. On the other hand, the development of the vaccines, even if it turns out the vaccines were much more negative and dangerous than it was thought at the time, the development of the vaccine was an extraordinary feat. Nonetheless, COVID really destroyed the prospects of having a cleanly analyzed presidency, and I think it'll depend what happens here. But for our whole lives, those historians have been liberally biased. I mean, you look at their ratings of the presidents; they're ridiculously skewed towards modern Democrats. So, I don't know. Will historians still be liberal in 50 years? I don't know.
Interesting. One of my favorite things at the Reagan Ranch, I don't know if you've been to the Reagan Center that they built as sort of the museum piece, Young America's Foundation.
Yeah.
They have a display of all the headlines of written about Ronald Reagan when he was president. And it's eerie how similar they are, the things that they said about Reagan, about what they say about Trump. And actually now, these days, Reagan has pretty high ratings, doesn't he, as a former president?
He does. And Democrats and their friends in the press, they love Reagan and the Bushes and
amazing how that works.
Every Republican president not named Trump.
Yes. Mark Halperin, thank you. What a great conversation.
Larry, thank you. Much appreciate it. Love your program and grateful to be on it.
Back at you. In fact, I'll see you later this week filling in for Sean, I think. So
looking forward to it.
Early in the morning. Thank you, Mark.